Hello everybody and welcome back. I'm really late to the party, so apologies for this, but I did really want to take some time out to review and take a look at the new wave of B&M exclusive character option Doctor Who action figures that have just hit the shelves. And I'm going to start off today by taking a look at the first of three sets, which is the Deadly Assassin set, or the Timelords set. Now then, putting my cards on the table, I have to say of the three sets, this is the one I was most anticipating because I've wanted a classic Time Lord in my collection for a very long time, and it felt as if it was never going to happen. So I'm really delighted to finally have not just one, but three classic Time Lords in my 5-inch scale Doctor Who action figure collection. This is tremendously exciting and I couldn't wait to get started. But I do have to start off with a slight querying of the approach the character options take to some of these sets, because they do seem to quite like producing box sets of the same figure 3 times or 2 times over, which I don't know if that's going to speak to a lot of people, but it's a little bit of a hard sell, and I think they probably might have been better doing 3 separate sets, including one Time Lord variant in each one. I don't know. There's a number of different stories where we have classic Time Lords, and I'm sure they could have found a way to do that. Now, for me personally, I don't mind, but I do think some people will probably feel a little bit cheesed off with this. But let's kick off by taking a look at the packaging. Now, as you will probably know, I really like this new packaging that we've got this year. I think this is a lot more colourful than what we've had over the last 4 or 5 years. I really love the new anniversary logo. It looks really good. I love that diamond logo. I think it works really well. It's nice and colourful. It's definitely nostalgic, and I think it works tremendously well. So I do like the use of white space, but I love the splash of blue light, and of course that image of the TARDIS there. And of course we have that window cut out display there and the plastic interior. I think this looks really good. I think this is very presentable and very fun looking. So I think they've done a really nice job with this packaging, and I hope it sticks around for a good few years. If we take a look at the side panel, there's not as much going on here. We have the logo again and a little bit of carryover, a little bit of bleed there of the light field and star field. It's fine. It's nothing really to write home about. Pretty bland, really, all in all. Now, if we flip it and look at the reverse of the packaging, here we have that unusual approach that character options take to these sets, whereby they don't really have any images, but they do have a lot of text about the story itself. And this can be really interesting sometimes. There's interesting behind-the-scenes tidbits, little factoids and things that I didn't know, trivia bits and pieces, which is quite fun. In this case, it's really just focusing on the story itself and these 3 characters. And once again, the interior inlay design is that sort of light field. I guess it's the top of the TARDIS lamp perhaps shooting out, or maybe it's meant to be the time vortex, I'm not quite sure. It's really colourful. It's definitely in keeping with the tone and feel of the titles of the 70s era of the show. I think this look works really well. I think it's very colourful. It would be nice if they shook it up a little bit between different sets. They did used to do some pretty fun dioramas for some of these sets, and they haven't done that for quite a while now, which is a shame. But if you're going to go this route, then I think this is a colourful way of doing it. Okay, so let's open up the figures, and I'm going to start off with the titular hero, of course. We're going to look at the Doctor first of all, and this is the 4th Doctor as played by Tom Baker. Now, it does feature a brand new sculpt. Yeah, it's just very disappointing. It's so strange with character options. It feels like they hit the ground running with one of their earlier sculpts, which was pretty much pitch perfect, and since then, every subsequent one just seems to be wider of the mark each year, which is really strange. I don't think this is a good likeness, to be honest. I think there's minus points here because it just looks very strange. So yeah, very disappointing. This isn't a good Tom Baker likeness. But on the positive, I have to say, I really like the paint apps. I think they've done a really nice job. There's a number of different colours and washes running through the hair and through the hat piece, which I think looks really good. And there's some fine detailing in the eyes and the lips, which, you know, for the most part work pretty well. I love the headdress. I think this is fantastic. Now, this is not a new piece. We've seen this before, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. But I do really love the seal of Rassilon that we see on the collar there, and I think this looks really good. So, all in all, I think this looks pretty good. It's just very disappointing in terms of the sculpting. Now, weirdly, of the 3 figures in this set, the 4th Doctor is probably the most drab in terms of appearance, but that being said, we actually have some nice washes running through this figure, so it's not just the plastic or rubber that has been sculpted in that sort of brown. We actually see a number of different washes running through to give it a little bit more depth and texture, and I think this works pretty well. It's also worth noting that the 4th Doctor is the only one without gloves, so he does have the flesh-coloured hands as well, and you can see throughout the whole figure, throughout all of these robes, we can see that little bit of extra paint wash running through them just to give it that bit more depth, which I do commend them for. I think this works really quite well. With the exception of the heads, all 3 of these figures are identical, so I'll just run through the articulation the once. There is a straight swivel at the top of the neck, allowing the head to move from side to side. The collar is flexible, by the way, which is a nice touch. I think that works really well. There's a straight swivel at the shoulder, allowing the arm to lift up, but not really back because of the robes. There is a swivel at the top of the bicep there, allowing the arm to rotate from side to side. And there's a single joint at the elbow, allowing that arm to roughly reach 90 degrees, which isn't bad, and then there's another swivel at the wrist allowing the hand to rotate all the way around. Now there's another swivel at the waist, which allows the bottom half of the body to move from side to side, but really there's not an awful lot you can do with this. There is some articulation in the legs, but again, you can't really get much out of this, really, because of the robes. Okay, so next up we have Barusa, and I have to say, of the 3 figures, he is the most colourful, and I really like the patterning and the paint apps they've applied to this figure, because he just looks absolutely stunning on display. However, of the 3, I'd have to say he probably has the worst likeness, in the sense that, well, this isn't really a very good likeness of the actor at all, really, and there's a very good reason for that, because if we look at the original release of the Time Lord, it actually came as part of the Series 4 wave of figures to celebrate the very brief appearance that they have in The Last of the Time Lords. And they've recycled this figure, and indeed they've recycled this sculpt, so if you look closely, you will see that, yeah, this is the same sculpt with a slightly different paint app, and is not really a true sculpt of the actor who played Barusa in The Deadly Assassin. So with that disappointment aside, though, I will say that the presentation and the paint apps applied to this figure are really very nice, but that is a massive disappointment and a bit of an oversight, and I'm not quite sure why that was. Maybe there's some licensing issues for that, but it is a bit strange. Now, as this figure is identical to the one we've just seen, I think what this really demonstrates is just what a difference paint apps can make to a figure, because this is the same sculpt with the same articulation, it's literally the same costume, but we have here a very different interpretation of the costume and character, and it just looks so different because of the fantastic paint apps that we see. I love this gold effect on the back, which is obviously just painted in, but it does create a completely different look for his costume. I also really like that they've painted the hands to give the glove effect. We can see the silver disc on the top of the palm there, which is great, and you know, of course, we have more depth and texture to the various robes as well, because these are painted slightly differently, and it just almost looks like a different figure, even though it's exactly the same. It's just paint. And then finally we have Chancellor Goth, and I have to say I think probably Goth is the most successful of these figures, because the head sculpt is really good, and the paint apps are pretty nice too. So let's take a look at this head sculpt. Here, this is a brand new sculpt, and I have to say I think the likeness is really pretty sharp, especially for this scale, and this is something that character options have a long history of really nailing and getting quite right, so it's always disappointing when we see things like the Tom where it's just not as strong, because they can do cracking stuff like this. So I think the paint apps are really good, the sculpt is really nicely done, and we can see the variation in the costume here, the colours they've used. He's a little bit of a brighter version of what we see with the 4th Doctor. There's a little bit more splash of red and gold here, which really makes up for that. Now, in terms of the accuracy, it's not quite spot on. If you really want to nitpick, that band around the top of the collar is a little bit thicker in the show than it is here. It's a lot narrower, but hey, this more than is adequate for my needs. I think this is pretty close enough. Again, all the differences of this figure come through the innovative and clever use of paint apps, and it does make a world of difference. We do see some nice washes and shading through this, and some specific character details as well. I really like the line going down the centre of the robes with the sort of crisscross pattern there, the silver and the black works really well. Again, we see the gloves with the silver disc, and overall we just have a little bit more depth in colours because we see different shades of those brown and golds, which I think work really well. So all in all, this is a very attractive, very colourful version of the 4th Doctor's costume. And there's no two ways about it. I think this is a very nice set, one that fans have been clamouring for a very long time, myself included. I love this classic Time Lord look. I think it just looks really effective. So in terms of my final thoughts, I am only going to give it 3 stars though, and I think on the one hand, yes, it's meeting that need, which is great, and I think the colours, the design, the actual mould and sculpts of the bodies are really, really good. And we do have one fantastic sculpt there in Chancellor Goth. Where things go downhill for me are the sculpts of Tom Baker, the 4th Doctor. It just seems to be a little bit weaker compared to the usual sort of benchmark and standard we're used to. And then, of course, Barusa, well, it's not Barusa. That's a major problem. The other thing I'd say about this figure, or these figures, because it's the same one 3 times over, is the real lack of articulation with these figures. It's there, but you really can't do an awful lot with it. Basically, all you can do is turn the heads and lift the hands up and down, the arms up and down, and that's basically all you can do. And you know, that's fine, that's fairly appropriate for what we see them do in the show. They're quite regal and they don't really do an awful lot in terms of action and stuff, so that's absolutely fine. I totally take that point. But at the same time, there is something statuesque about them, and they're a little bit distant, for lack of a better word. Yeah, I don't know. They look cool, they look really fun on display. I really love the colours, and I think that works really well. But at the same time, as an action figure, they're a little bit lacking. And I think they could have made up for this by having some fun accessories in there. There's actually quite a few in that particular show. They could have even thrown in the president who gets assassinated. Sorry, spoilers. But there's some cool props there that they could have included, which would have made this a bit more interesting and made each character feel a bit more unique and distinctive. But sadly, they didn't decide to do that. All in all, a nice set. Certainly, if you're a fan, you're going to want to pick this up. If you're not, you're probably going to want to pass. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.